push it into the void under the floor. The floor tiles are made from thick, solid materials which contain the air within the void. Some of the floor tiles have grills built into them which allows air to flow through them. These grills are strategically placed near the servers so that the cold air can exit the void and be sucked directly into the servers. The servers have small fans installed to help move air across the circuit boards and cool it down, similar to your PC or laptop. This air will carry the unwanted heat away, where it will be sucked back into the crack unit and removed from the room. When it comes to crack units, we have two main types. Chilled water and direct expansion. We also have upflow and downflow, which indicates the direction. We also have upflow and downflow. Which indicates the direction the cooled air flows. Downflow is the most common, so we will focus on this type. Smaller data centers will often use direct expansion units, where an internal compressor pushes refrigerant around the system. A fan moves the hot air over a heat exchange refrigerant around the system. A fan moves the hot air compressor will often use common, so we will focus on the direction the cooled air flows. Downflow is the most common, so we will focus on this type. Smaller data centers will often use direct expansion units. Where an internal compressor pushes refrigerant around the system. A fan moves the hot air over pushes refrigerant around. Use direct expansion units, where an internal compressor pushes refrigerant around the system. A fan moves the hot air over a heat exchanger known as the evaporator. The refrigerant flows Going inside the evaporator absorbs this heat, so the air leaves cooler and is pushed into the void under the floor. The refrigerant flows to the condenser unit located outside. A fan blows air over the pipes to remove the heat from the system. The refrigerant then returns to collect more thermal energy. By the way, we have covered the basics of refrigeration systems in detail previously. I'll leave a link for you in the video description down below to learn more. Larger data centers will use chillers, either water-cooled or air-cooled type. With air-cooled systems, we find the chiller installed externally. This provides chilled water to the crack unit, which flows through a heat exchanger to pick up the unwanted heat from the air. The fan moves the hot air over the heat exchanger, the unwanted water to. We find the chiller installed externally. This provides chilled water. Water to the crack unit, which flows through a heat exchanger to pick up the unwanted heat from the air. The fan moves the hot air over the heat exchanger, and once the heat is removed, it is pushed into the void under the floor. The water returns to the chiller with the heat it collected. It enters the evaporator, the water, and once the heat is removed, the fan, which flows through a heat exchanger to pick up the unwanted heat from the air. The fan moves the hot air over the heat exchanger, and once the heat is removed, it is pushed into the void under the floor. The water returns to the chiller with the heat it collected. It enters the The water returns to the chiller with the heat it collected. It enters the evaporator where the heat is transferred into a refrigerant. The refrigerant removes the heat from the water and cools it down. The water cycles around again to collect more heat.
My name is Andra Martin. I'm an architect. I work and live at Bintaro, Jakarta. Sebetulnya karena waktu kelas 3 SMA saya itu ada psikotes di mana hasilnya menyarankan saya menjadi arsitek atau dokter. Jadi dokter takut darah. Tapi waktu jadi arsitek kelihatannya memang banyak hal visual yang dari kecil memang hal-hal tersebut yang saya suka. Saya ingin berusaha untuk jujur dan lebih baik sedikit setiap harinya. Sebagai arsitek, saya ingin merancang dengan menghormati lingkungan, memahami konteks, fokus pada fungsi, dan tetap konteks, fokus pada fungsi, dan tetap menghadirkan keindahan. Menurut saya, penting juga untuk memberikan nilai tambah bagi masyarakat lewat karya arsitektur. Dengan iklim tropis dan keberagaman budaya yang kita miliki, arsitektur Indonesia mencerminkan sejarah dan latar belakangnya. Arsitektur vernakular Indonesia itu sangat indah, dan desain yang kita lihat sekarang merupakan hasil perkembangan dari unsur-unsur tersebut. Rumah ini terletak di Jalan Manyar, bagian dari kompleks perumahan lama di Bintaro. Ini adalah klaster pertama yang dikembangkan oleh Bintaro sejak tahun 1980. Rumah ini berada di pojok dengan lebar bukaan 7 meter di sisi jalan dan melebar ke belakang. Di depannya ada taman umum yang menjadi inspirasi utama saya dalam mendesain rumah ini. Jadi begitu kita masuk, yang akan dilihat adalah kolam ikan dengan suara gemercik. Ada beberapa ikan koi yang membuat kita jadi lebih tenang dan lebih teduh. Sangat kontras dengan luar yang lebih berisik dan lebih terik. dan yang begitu orang masuk akan lihat library, kemudian di sebelah kanan ada kandang kucing dan ada rem yang seolah-olah menarik dan menuntun kita untuk jalan ke lantai 2. Di rumah saya banyak sekali kucing-kucing karena istri saya senang sekali dengan mengambil kucing dari jalanan. Kucing itu dipelihara dan kini kita punya 80. Perpustakaan ini terinspirasi dari ruang-ruang di Jepang, di mana ketika pertama kali multifungsi, bahkan disangkanya itu fungsi.
And it reflects the road at the back of the dunes and it runs right up. So the design of the house responds more to the canopy of the Putakawa trees than it does to the beach in some way. On arrival, you arrive in a car, you drive underneath the building. There's some storage down on that level, but essentially you arrive up a spiral stair and you are immediately encountered with a negative space in the center of the square of the plan above, which is open. It's an open courtyard, which is glazed on 3 sides. You then enter into a very simple living, dining, kitchen arrangement, which is spread out so that we can pick up the view onto the beach from all the spaces. There's a circulation system which wraps around the open courtyard, which gets you to 3 bedrooms around the back and bathrooms attached to those. So the building form really came out of, the first decision was to lift it out of the ground to get the view, and then what we really wanted to do was engage with the Putakawa trees. So a clear story all the way around the top floor allows us to engage with the trees from all spaces. The bedrooms, the bathrooms, each one having its own particular relationship with different parts of the forest. That really is one of the most rewarding things because it has been beyond our imagination in terms of its success, is that it really does. You can be in the space and you cannot help but your eyes constantly lift up, being pulled up to the trees. So it's been remarkably successful in that regard. The outside of the building is essentially 2 materials, and that's glass and bandsawn cedar with a black stain on it, which is fractured and colored to kind of pick up on the striated bark of a Putakawa tree. Otherwise, we've got some blockwork and some steel in the base of the building, but essentially it's a very monopalette on the outside. It's just black timber, glass. Material-wise, once we get inside of the building, we're essentially using a palette of birch ply and structural radiata timber and spotted glum flooring. So where we've used the birch ply on the outside, we've stained it dark to match the color of the trees, whereas we've kept the natural color of the timber to the radiata frame and to the ceiling and onto the floor. Just natural timber colors inside the space. The other senses are very well serviced in this part of the world as well. Trees.
The refrigerant flows to the condenser, where fans move ambient air over the pipes to reject the heat to the atmosphere. The refrigerant then flows back to the evaporator to collect more unwanted heat from the water. With water-cooled systems, we find the chiller installed internally, with a cooling tower located externally. The chiller sends chilled water to the crack unit to collect the unwanted heat. And then it returns this to the chiller's evaporator. A refrigerant inside the evaporator returns this to the chiller's evaporator. A refrigerant inside the evaporator collects this heat and transfers this to the condenser. Another stream of water is flowing in the condenser, known as the condenser water. This absorbs the thermal energy and sends it to the cooling tower. From here, the water is usually sprayed into a stream of ambient air, which removes the heat and cools the water down. The water then returns to the condenser much cooler, ready to collect more thermal energy. We can also get dry cooling towers, which are less efficient, but the condenser water simply flows through a heat exchanger with air blown over this to remove the heat, instead of the water being sprayed into the airstream. By the way, we have covered how chillers work in great detail previously. Links for that in the video description down below. Some CRAC units will be connected to multiple cooling systems to ensure there is always cooling available, even if one unit was to fail. Some data centers also connect alternate CRAC units to different cooling systems to ensure resilience. Newer data centers built in cooler climates do not use refrigerants. They instead will use free and evaporative cooling. In this design, the outdoor air is sucked in through some filters. Evaporative coolers then spray water into the airstream to cool it and humidify it. The air then flows directly into the server room, with the hot exhaust air being separated and extracted back out to the atmosphere. Data centers with refrigeration systems can also make use of free cooling when the outdoor air is cool enough. For example, an auxiliary air-cooled condenser can be fitted, which uses fans to remove as much thermal energy as possible from the condenser water before it reaches the chiller. Other designs will allow the chiller to be bypassed altogether, with the chilled water exchanging thermal energy to the condenser water via a plate heat exchanger. This only works when the outdoor air is cool enough. For efficient design, we need to ensure that all the servers are facing the same way, so that they all suck cold air in the front and blow hot air out of the back. Otherwise, the exhaust of one server will be sucked into the inlet of another server. We need to therefore also ensure that floor grills are only installed where cooling is required. In this case, only at the front of the servers, not at the exhaust side, not in open areas, or in front of empty racks. We also need to ensure that the airflow through the grills are balanced. Otherwise, the grills nearest the CRAC units will vent all the cold air, and the rear units will receive very little. The grills need to be located near the front of the servers, otherwise the cold air will bypass them and head straight back to the CRAC unit. The void needs to be kept clear of objects and unused cables, which will otherwise obstruct the flow of air. When several rows of servers are installed, then the problem occurs where the hot exhaust of one row of servers is sucked into the next. The temperature increases with each row, which is very inefficient. We would need to provide even cooler air just to keep the final server cool enough. Obviously, this wouldn't be very efficient. So instead, we arrange the rows so that they are facing front to front and back to back. This way, we only provide cold air to the front of the servers, and the hot exhaust isn't sucked into another server. This creates hot and cold aisles. We need to ensure that empty spaces in the servers are filled with blanking plates. This will prevent warm exhaust air from recirculating. Additionally, the fans in the server racks will cause a negative pressure region of servers, and the hot exhaust isn't sucked into another server. This creates hot and cold aisles. We need to ensure that empty spaces in the servers are filled with blanking plates. This will prevent warm exhaust air from recirculating. Additionally, the fans in the server racks will cause a negative pressure region at the front of the server, and this can draw warm exhaust air down, which can then be recirculated back into the server. For existing data centers, one of the best designs is to use cold aisle containment. This is where the cold aisle is covered with a roof and the end of the aisles are sealed with doors. This puts a physical barrier between the aisles to prevent mixing and recirculation. Newer data centers will likely use hot aisle containment. In this design, cold air fills the room and the hot exhaust air is contained and separated with a ceiling. This air is then drawn back into the CRAC units. Check out one of these videos to continue learning about engineering, and I'll catch you there for the next lesson. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, as well as theengineeringmindset.com.